Welcome back to Wrestling Impact, the channel where the stories hit harder than the wrestlers themselves, and trust me, after what you're about to hear, you're going to understand exactly what I mean by that. Because what happened backstage at the last event wasn't just a wrestling story, it was a mystery, a conspiracy, a powder keg that had been building for weeks, and when it finally exploded, it sent shockwaves through the entire locker room. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody except Bronson Reed, and tonight, we're telling you everything. Now before we get into it, I need you to do something for me. I need you to think back. Think back to the last few weeks of programming. Think about the attacks. Think about the shadows lurking at the end of hallways. Think about the camera crews that caught just enough footage to make you question everything but never quite enough to give you a clear answer. Someone was moving through that backstage area like a ghost, striking without warning, disappearing before anyone could catch them, and leaving devastation in their wake. Superstars were being taken out. Not in the ring backstage. In the corridors. In the locker rooms. In the parking lot, wherever they felt safest. That's exactly where this mystery attacker chose to strike. And for weeks, 4 agonizing, nail-biting weeks, nobody could figure out who it was. Until Bronson Reed decided he had enough. Now let's set the scene properly, because this story deserves to be told right. Bronson Reed, for those who might need a reminder, is not the kind of man you want to make angry. This is a human wrecking ball. 6'4", over 350 pounds of absolute destruction wrapped in a frame that looks like it was carved out of a mountain somewhere in the Australian outback. When Bronson Reed walks into a room, the air changes. The temperature drops a little. People move. People clear the way. Because Bronson Reed doesn't just take up space, he commands it. And he has spent the last several months of his career being one of the most dangerous, most unpredictable, most legitimately terrifying forces in professional wrestling today. But even giants have a breaking point. The attacks had been going on for about 3 weeks before Reed himself became a target. And at that right there was the mistake. That was the moment this mystery attacker went from being a problem for everyone else to being a personal vendetta for Bronson Reed. Because when you poke the bear, when you step out of the shadows and put your hands on the most imposing man in that locker room, you don't get to stay hidden forever. You just put a timer on yourself. And that clock was ticking. The night it happened to Reed, the cameras backstage caught fragments. You could see Reed walking through the corridor after a match, still in his gear, still amped up from the crowd energy. He was heading toward the locker room, towel over his shoulder, earbuds in, completely in his own world. And that's when it happened. From a side corridor from a hallway that was supposedly restricted, something came out of the darkness. A figure. Moving fast. Moving with purpose. And before Reed even registered what was happening, he took a vicious shot from behind. A steel chair, some reports said. Others said it was a blunt object wrapped in something to muffle the sound. Whatever it was, it sent Reed crashing into the concrete wall, and by the time security arrived 30 seconds later, the attacker was gone. Vanished. Like they had never been there at all. Now here's where the story gets interesting. Here's where Bronson Reed becomes something more than just a wrestler looking for revenge. Because while everyone else was filing reports, looking at grainy camera footage, and pointing fingers at half a dozen different suspects, Reed was doing something different. Reed was watching. Reed was paying attention. And Reed was setting a trap. In the days following his own attack, Reed was unusually quiet. And I want you to understand something. Quiet Bronson Reed is actually scarier than angry Bronson Reed. Angry Bronson Reed you can see coming. Quiet Bronson Reed is a man with a plan. And the plan, as it turned out, was nothing short of brilliant. He started putting information out there, letting it be known through the locker room that he was going to be in a specific area of the arena at a specific time. He made it seem casual, like he was just telling a couple of guys where he was going to be warming up before the show. But that information was carefully seeded, deliberately placed into the ecosystem of the backstage environment. Because Reed had a theory about the attacker. He believed that whoever this person was, they were getting their information from inside. They knew schedules. They knew routes. They knew when superstars were alone and vulnerable. That's not luck. That's intelligence. And to beat someone with intelligence, you have to outthink them. So Reed set the stage. He told just enough people. He made the bait too good to resist. And this is the part that just gives you chills, he hid. Bronson Reed, 350 plus pounds of Australian nightmare, found himself a position in that backstage corridor, and he waited, patient as a hunter, still as a stone. For 40 minutes, according to those who were in the know, Reed sat there in the dark and he waited for the trap to spring. And then he heard it. Footsteps. Careful footsteps. The kind of footsteps someone makes when they think they're being sneaky, but they don't know that someone far more dangerous than them is already in position. The door at the far end of the corridor opened slowly. A figure slipped through. Dark clothing. Hood up. Moving low and fast toward the spot where Reed was supposed to be warming up. And just as the attacker reached that spot and realized their target wasn't there, just as that moment of confusion registered, Bronson Reed stepped out of the shadows. And the look on the attacker's face when they turned around and saw Reed standing there, oh, that look. That split second of absolute, complete, soul-crushing realization that they had walked directly into a trap, and now there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and absolutely no scenario in which this ended well for them. That look was worth every single one of those 40 minutes Reed spent waiting in the dark. Reed grabbed them. One arm, like picking up a piece of luggage, and he pulled the hood back. Now I know you want the name. I know that's exactly what you've been waiting for, and we are going to get there. But I need you to appreciate the moment first, because the reveal wasn't just a name. It was a story. It was an explanation. It was an entire chain of events suddenly clicking into place all at once for everyone who witnessed it. Because the person under that hood had history in that locker room. Deep history. The kind of history that burns. This wasn't a random act of chaos for the sake of chaos. This was a calculated, meticulous, deeply personal campaign of destruction rooted in something that had been festering for a long time. Scores that had never been settled. Opportunities that had been taken rather than earned. Respect that had been denied. And sometimes when a person reaches their limit, when all of that pain and resentment and humiliation builds up to a point where it has nowhere else to go, it comes out in the darkest possible way. The person Bronson Reed pulled out of that hood was none other than Marcus Vale. Now, if that name doesn't immediately ring every bell in your wrestling fan brain, let me refresh your memory, because Marcus Vale's story is one of those stories that wrestling fans should know by heart. Marcus Vale came up through the system the hard way. Years of traveling, years of paying dues, years of quietly being one of the best technical wrestlers in that locker room without ever quite getting the spotlight he felt he deserved. And for a long time, Marcus was patient about it. He did his work. He kept his head down. He waited for his moment. But moments in professional wrestling are earned and taken in equal measure, and somewhere along the way, Marcus Vale decided that waiting wasn't working, and instead of channeling that frustration into something constructive, something that could have propelled him to the top of the card legitimately, he made a different choice. A darker choice. A choice that involved shadows and steel chairs and attacking people from behind in the places where they felt safest. And why target Bronson Reed specifically? Because Bronson Reed represented everything Marcus Vale felt he should have been. Reed had the size. Reed had the presence. Reed had walked through doors that Vale had knocked on for years without answer. In Vale's mind, twisted by bitterness, warped by resentment, taking out Reed wasn't just strategy. It was symbolic. It was a statement. It was him saying, loudly and violently, that he was done playing by rules that had never worked in his favor. The problem, the fatal, ironic, almost poetic problem, was that he chose Bronson Reed to make that statement. Out of every person in that locker room, he chose the one man with the patience to set a trap, the instincts to execute it perfectly, and the sheer physical presence to make sure there was no escape once the trap closed. When Reed pulled back that hood and stood face to face with Marcus Vale, the corridor was dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. And Reed, calm, controlled, still riding that hunter's composure, looked at Vale for a long moment before he spoke. And what he said was simple. It was quiet. And it landed harder than any steel chair ever could. He said, "You wanted my attention. Now you've got it." What happened next was witnessed by 4 members of production, 2 security personnel, and 1 backstage interviewer who was absolutely not supposed to be in that corridor, but who was absolutely the reason we have the full account of this story. Reed didn't do what you might expect. He didn't unleash 3 weeks of pent-up fury in that hallway. He didn't put Vale through a wall. Instead, and this is the part that tells you everything you need to know about Bronson Reed as not just a wrestler but as a competitor, he made Vale walk with him, all the way to the office of the senior official on duty that night. Every step of the way. In front of every camera, every crew member, every locker room veteran who stepped out into the corridor to see what was happening. Because Reed understood something that Vale, in all his scheming and planning, had completely missed. The most devastating punishment Reed could deliver wasn't physical. It was exposure. It was pulling that hood back, not just in that corridor, but in front of the entire world. Making Marcus Vale own every single thing he had done in the full light of day, with nowhere left to hide and no shadow left to disappear into. By the time they reached that office, the corridor behind them had filled up. Wrestlers who had been attacked over those 3 weeks. Crew members who had been collateral damage in Vale's campaign. All of them watching. All of them finally having the answer to a question that had haunted the entire backstage environment for weeks. And Marcus Vale, to whatever remains of his credit, didn't deny it. Couldn't deny it. He stood there in that office and he owned it, because there was simply nothing else left to do. The trap had been perfect. The reveal had been public. The story was over, at least the mystery chapter of it. But here's the thing about wrestling stories. Here's the thing that makes this sport unlike anything else on the planet. They never really end. Because what comes after the reveal is often more compelling than the mystery itself. Marcus Vale is now fully out of the shadows. His motivations are known. His methods are exposed. And Bronson Reed, who could have ended this in that corridor with violence, chose instead to end it with something far more powerful: accountability. Which means the next chapter of this story happens in the ring, where it should have always happened. Under the lights, in front of the crowd, with every emotion and every grievance and every moment of pain on both sides laid bare for the entire world to see. That's where this rivalry goes next. And if the build-up has been this dramatic, this layered, this genuinely compelling, then what happens when these two men finally step between those ropes is going to be something that wrestling fans talk about for a very long time. Because Marcus Vale is genuinely talented. His frustrations, however misdirected, speak to real ability that has been underutilized. And Bronson Reed, motivated now not just by his own anger but by the responsibility he feels to everyone who was victimized during those 3 weeks, that Reed is going to be operating at a level of intensity and focus that is genuinely terrifying to think about. This is the match. This is the story. This is what wrestling does better than anything else in entertainment when it's firing on all cylinders. It takes real human emotion, ambition, resentment, patience, rage, justice, and it gives those emotions a stage and a resolution that feels earned, that feels satisfying, that makes you feel something real. Bronson Reed walked into that corridor with a plan and walked out with an answer. Now Marcus Vale has to live with the consequences. And all of us, every single fan who sat through 3 weeks of mystery and tension and not knowing we finally get the payoff. That's what Wrestling Impact is here for. To bring you the stories behind the stories. To give you the full picture when fragments are all the mainstream coverage bothers with. If you felt that tonight, if this story grabbed you and held you all the way to the end, then do me a favor and hit that like button right now, because that tells us to keep bringing you content exactly like this. Drop a comment below and tell me, did you see Marcus Vale coming, or did that reveal catch you completely off guard? I genuinely want to know. And if you're not already subscribed to Wrestling Impact, there has never been a better moment than right now to join this community, because stories like this one, we've got more coming. We're always watching. We're always digging. And we are never going to stop bringing you the truth behind what happens when the cameras are barely watching. This has been Wrestling Impact. Stay locked in. The next chapter starts now.